I will do a quick overview presentation if staff can bring that up, and then I'm going to invite the district court if you want to come up now. So right when I'm done, he can start sharing their impacts, just because I know that he's a timing issue of needing to get across street within the next 20 minutes.
Thank you.
So staff, if you could pull up the one I sent you this morning.
I have a question before we start. I'd just like to understand the assumptions on these numbers, if it does
Yes.
include.
And I
Okay,
will,
great.
we'll go over that. Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm going to apologize up front if there's any typos in this. I did this late last night, but with the thought of it will be published and put online, and there's links in there so people can actually go and watch prior discussions. So if you go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just, again, going to go over some background of what we're discussing today. The Law and Justice Partners are here. They're the experts in their field, and they'll be discussing any potential impacts and then potential next steps for council's discussion. So what started this was the City of Vancouver did make a recommendation in a public meeting to go out for Proposition 4. The council started meeting right away on this to discuss potential law and justice impacts. During that initial meeting, the Sheriff's Office also came forward asking for additional FTE. So this focused work was to look at impacts based on those additions, as well as financial information that we learned during this process that we're not recouping the full cost for countywide services in the tune about $4.6 million. Next slide. I'm not going to go over all of these, but this is where there is a link. There's been many public discussions regarding this, and the goal and what I heard from council and the county is we want to ensure law and justice is working. We want to make sure that public safety stays in the forefront, and it's very important in the community. Like I said, the discussion started in July. The ones with asterisks are that I put in there for key dates. That's the Law and Justice Council, which is a requirement in RCW. Those are not open to the public, but I did put on here just for transparency purposes, the work and the information that was shared during those meetings. I will note in here also, and I'll go over the proposal for this ad hoc committee. It was shared with the city manager. And actually, we asked for their representation from Vancouver to join that ad hoc committee so that we could fully understand what their proposition was. And so they actually provided the names for their CFO and one of the assistant police chiefs. Again, anybody in the public, I would encourage, if you want to hear additional dialogue, this link on the public discussions takes you to the county website where all the meetings are. You can type in the dates and you can hear the full discussions. This is just the Law and Justice Council. There is a huge diverse group that provides input, has the opportunity to review and discuss law and justice countywide. This includes not just county employees or elected officials such as the sheriff. It also includes the police departments, the state corrections, there's mental health, the Caseloads tribe, public health, the defense bar, community services. The mayor of Vancouver is the city legislative authority. So there's a wide range. This is included in the resolution, which is under their website, and I'll make sure we put a link to that resolution on here as well. So this is actually expanded than what is required by law. Countywide law and justice. So I wanted to call out, so we are required to provide these law and justice services for all of Clark County. And that includes Superior Court, District Court, Juvenile Court, the clerk's office, prosecuting attorney, public defense, and jail services. I will note, because I know the sheriff's office has been involved with this as well. They're not considered a county-wide service, as we have other jurisdictions have their own police department. So they really function and do the work on behalf of the law and justice system. So the ad hoc committee, and I took this language out of a memo that I had presented to the Law and Justice Committee or Council. And this is the same memo that I sent to the city manager. So these words and requests come directly from that memo. We're allowed to have the ad hoc committee pursuant to section 4 of their bylaws with a link there. The important part here is what the goal was, is to have a holistic, functional, and sustainable approach to law and justice, ensuring public safety needs are met in the community. Again, we were talking about Vancouver's request, the sheriff's office request, and then the law and justice regional stakeholders that have to support those efforts. There's 4 requests in this. The first one is to have the city of Vancouver and the sheriff's office provide an overview of what they were requesting to the ad hoc committee. So that where it was to, and it did happen at their first meeting. So the city of Vancouver joined this meeting as well as the sheriff's office to discuss additional staffing, the programs that they're asking for, the anticipated capital needs, financial impacts such as expenses and revenue streams, and the timeline for implementation. And I will note that all of that was considered in the financial assumptions that we'll talk about. The second request was the representation for all, again, the countywide law and justice services, as well as a financial representation from the county to assist to review the law enforcement's requests and outline below. So, and I will say at the initial meeting, the goal was the city and sheriff's office share what they need. And then they were also there to answer questions so that the law and justice partners could then have an informed, okay, this is what could happen. And then they went back, worked together and determined what would their impact be. What we asked the ad hoc committee to do is to look at the specific data to articulate all of those impacts, both for the city and the sheriff and the potential revenue sources. The third request, we put in there, provide a recommendation along council. There wasn't necessarily a recommendation, but data shared. So this is a type of positions that we'll need. This is when we'll need them. And then also provide a recommendation to the legislative body, which is what is going to happen this morning, which is information. I'm going to share my key takeaways from the ad hoc meeting, both from the initial meeting that I participated in. I was not part of all of their discussions, as well as what I heard during the report out at Law and Justice. So I took this from what other people said. So I will tell you that the Law and Justice partners will give you more information on these, but this is what I walked away. This is what I heard them say. Law and Justice partner discussion was collaborative and added value and will continue. This type of review is unprecedented. People reached out to their partners in the state and nobody has done this type of strategic planning looking forward. This is very preliminary information and adjustments will be made based on the actual impact. Again, unprecedented, but important. The city of Vancouver did confirm that cost allocation incorporated 6211 billing, which does not include funding for felonies, which are more than 90% of those housed in our jail. The anticipated cost also includes anything that may be billed through 6211. That is very defined on what we can and cannot recoup. Traffic camera program may have a significant impact at district court. Additional law enforcement doesn't mean additional high-level crimes such as murder. Overtime is impacting people on a critical level, and that is across the board. That's with police department, sheriff's office, jail employees, detention workers in juvenile. It is a known thing that we need to figure out. Countywide law and justice services are essential in supporting public safety and is currently not sustainable. What do I mean by that? We don't have enough funds to pay for that ongoing. And we're going to have some very direct and intentional discussions next year on that because we're going to see that tip potentially in 2026. So, and like I said earlier, the initial review showed that we're not recouping the funds now through ILA 6211 building with the city. So it's really important that if we don't address that internally, even as a status quo, it's not sustainable. With any potential impact, we're going to fail. And that's the goal of this, is to ensure that the goals that the sheriff's office and the city of Vancouver are going to be met in ensuring that we have public safety in the community. If we don't get capacity, we will be a bottleneck, and therefore those goals will not be realized. Additionally, data is important and collaboration is important. What I heard at Law and Justice is this was a good exercise. It's good data. It opened up discussions that have never been happened before, and they're committed on their own to continuing this discussion at least quarterly. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to the experts that have joined us this morning, who is the Law and Justice Partners, who actually looked into their operations. They know their business, they know the impacts, and allow them to present what this looks like and the impact for them. And we'll start with District Court this morning, as he has other commitments here in about 10 minutes.
Good morning. This is on. Good morning, Council. Good morning, County Manager's Office. Thank you for having us today to discuss the impacts. We did do a pretty comprehensive deep dive in District Court to come up with some assumptions that made sense to us. I do want to emphasize, for us, these are estimates. Also, that the courts don't control the flow of cases coming into the system. That's not something that we have any control over. And then also a unique aspect for District Court is that we have multiple pathways that cases take in our system in District Court. So one case filing doesn't just mean that's an impact on the courtroom. One case filing could mean that's an impact on our pretrial program, our probation program, our therapeutic courts. It's an impact on our shared services interpreters program, which we manage. And I also want to focus or say that our pretrial program in District Court serves both Superior and District Court. So our assumptions are based on felony case filings as well in those programs. What we did is we wanted to really look into case filings. We separated out both city and sheriff's office case filings in our agency. And we wanted to come up with a number of officers that would typically and more likely cite into District Court, because we only hear misdemeanor crimes and infractions. So we came up with an officer count. Approximately about 105 officers in Vancouver Police Department would typically cite into District Court. And that is for both misdemeanors and infractions. And the number of officers for the sheriff's office citing into District Court is about 70. So what we did is we took our projected 2024 case filings for the city. That's 3,608 misdemeanors filed with District Court. And we divided it by those 105 officers to come up with a count of how many misdemeanors per officer could be cited into District Court on an annual basis. And then we multiplied that by, for the city of Vancouver, out of the 80 they're proposing, we've heard that only about 69 of those officers will be placed on the street who could potentially make arrests or write traffic tickets. And so we came up with an additional 2,371 cases could be filed with District Court at the full rollout at the 5-year mark if the officers are out on the street. For the sheriff's office, we came up with an additional 626 new misdemeanors per year based on their numbers. We did subtract 14 officers from the total 40 count that they're requesting, because we were informed that those 14 would just fill overtime slots. So we wanted to be realistic about that. And then for infractions, using the same methodology, we would see 1,711 new written infractions. That's traffic stops that happen where an infraction occurs for the city. And then we would see potentially another 554 from the county. The unknown and the scariest part of this for us is the implementation of traffic enforcement cameras. This is an unknown. There's very few comparables. In working with the sheriff's office, and I want to thank Brian Salsig for the information, we kind of worked through a reasonable number that we feel, which is 75 tickets per camera per month. And if that is the case, that's 27,000 new traffic infraction filings per year for District Court. When it comes to photo enforcement cameras, the impact of that is even larger. There are for most every agency that's implemented something like this, the impact is in the courtroom as well. There's a lot more folks who contest these types of hearings. They question the constitutionality of photo radar enforcement, which will completely grow the need for judicial officers and staff to process these cases. As we move farther down, the pretrial impacts, so we took the new case filing numbers that we could see in 2032, and we also came up with a percentage of cases for both City of Vancouver and the Clark County Sheriff's Office that would end up on pretrial. So 34% of all VPD misdemeanors end up in our pretrial program. That's an additional 805 new pretrial cases in 2032. And about 19% of our Sheriff's Office cases end up on our pretrial program for misdemeanors. That's an additional 119 new pretrial cases per year, and that's just for misdemeanors. So there's also an impact from Superior Court with felony cases. So total new misdemeanor cases could be almost to 1,000 per year in 2032, or pretrial cases. Probation impacts 37% of all VPD misdemeanors end up on probation. That's 877 new probation cases in our probation department. And 26% of all Sheriff's Office misdemeanors end up on probation, which is another 163 new probation cases. And then and I just want to reference this, if you look at our staffing needs, we right now are not in line with best practices in our probation department. Typically, anybody managing a moderate to high risk individual should only have 50 people to one probation officer. We're running at 80 right now. And our low risk caseloads should be around 200 per officer, and we're running between 300 and 400 for some. So that could be another 1,040 cases, new cases in probation in 2032. We also house our community restitution work crew program. And we know that 33% of work crew referrals are from city cases, which means we would have 782 new referrals every year to our work crew program. And then again, 38% of our Sheriff's Office cases are referred to community restitution, which would mean 238 new referrals to work crew. So that's a total of 1,020 new work crew referrals by 2032. About 6% of city cases end up in one of our therapeutic court programs. That equates to about 142 new referrals to one of our therapeutic courts. And then for Sheriff's Office cases, about 4% of cases go to our therapeutic courts, which equates to about 25 new referrals to therapeutic courts, which is a total of 167 new cases going into therapeutic courts. Just as a reference, the impact in terms of judicial needs, we're anticipating a need of 5 judicial officers by 2032, 3 commissioners and 2 judges. The commissioners are heavier weight because they handle our infractions cases. But just as a reference, 2023, we held 35,000 hearings in district court. 15,500 of those were from VPD cases. So they hold 43% of all the hearings that are held. We anticipated an increase of about 11,000 new court hearings that would be needed if there's a full rollout in 2032. Also, in terms of jury trials, we don't have a lot of jury trials in district court, but we would typically see an extra 40 jury trials throughout the year in 2032 as well. With all of that said, our staffing needs, it's not just about line staff. So when you add line staff, you also have to add a support structure for line staff, which means management. One of our programs we would probably need to pull out, we do provide EHM services to both felony and misdemeanor clients as well. We currently have 300 people every single day on some form of electronic monitoring, whether it's alcohol monitoring, GPS with victim notification for domestic violence cases, or some true home confinement type situation. If in 2032, if we grow, we would have to actually create an entire program and staff to support the need for that program by itself. But But our anticipation is that we would need 105 staff members to support this growth by 2032. And that's 5 judicial officers and 100 staff, including management. With the infractions unknown, that could be seen as an entirely new unit within our agency, where we would need to hire staff, management, lead workers, and the significance for district court is there. I believe our data is good, and it definitely could change. But I do want to just state what Kathleen was stating now is we're seeing 20% growth without the increase in officers right now. We saw a 37% growth in overall case filings. That's is including all of our civil and small claims case filings as well in 23. And we're seeing a 20% growth this year in our criminal case filings across the board. So we're already there where we need support and assistance. But if this all goes through, and we're not here to oppose or to support any efforts, we're just letting you know truly what would be needed, according to us, in district court if there's a full rollout of a law enforcement expansion.
So this may turn into a very long presentation today, but let me ask, are there any questions of
Yeah, Chair.
council? And as we get into those questions, I'm going to ask, I asked earlier, and I want to ask once again, because we had other elected due presentations aside from Prop 4 implications. Do we have anyone from the city council on listening to this information? If you know.
And they could be listening, but not logged on through the system.
Okay.
But I am more than happy to send them a link to this.
Yeah. So, council's questions. Glenn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple quick ones. The first one I'd like to ask is, especially with the traffic cases, there is a fine that people pay. And I don't know, I have no clue, where does that fine money go to? And would it ultimately cover the program? Would it go to the city of Vancouver? Would part of it come to the county? Do we know what would happen with that fine money?
Yeah, it does. It gets split. So it gets split between the state, the city, and the county.
Okay, so
I don't know the percentages off the top of my head. I apologize.
Okay, so did we kind of factor that in at all?
I have not factored that in. We were not tasked with coming up with our individual costs, just our projections on what staff we need. So as we go forward, I think we'll have a better answer. I think just to also say the one unique piece for district court is that we do receive 6211 revenue, and increased case filings means that some of the cost will be recouped for district court. So we would have to factor all of those things in as well.
And I can
Okay.
share the 6211 billing is incorporated into the cost. It's about half, I believe, is what Mark had told us. So that is incorporated into the cost that you're seeing.
Okay. Yeah, and I realize that there is no exact science to this. There's no precedent to look at. So it's really difficult. One of the comments that I did hear from the city council meeting on yesterday, I think, was it yesterday? Monday, 2 days ago, losing track of my days here, but was that and again, there's no way that we can predict this accurately without just kind of stumbling through and seeing what actually happens as we move forward. But one of the things that was mentioned is specifically with felonies. Felonies are typically high priority for law enforcement. So the majority of the felony cases are already being addressed, and having additional officers isn't going to create more felonies. It will allow more presence to react quicker, probably, which might
So
might
Glenn,
generate some
we do
additional.
have district court in front of us right now, and I appreciate you carrying the water for this on behalf of the city. Can you hold those comments until we get
No,
into that
Gary, can I
discussion
finish,
with the
please?
prosecuting attorney? And public
Can
defense,
I continue
and
my
jail.
comment, please?
Are there
Right.
other questions by council for district court?
I have a quick question.
Please go ahead.
I believe, and I don't know if you can answer this for historical context purposes, but I believe, I think it was like a decade ago, the city did try to roll out a traffic camera program, and then they did away with it because the cost of the administering that program exceeded the revenue that was brought in. Do you know anything about that, or can you answer that?
I'm sorry, I wasn't here then, and I do know that that did exist. We don't have any data to tell us how that played out, so I apologize.
No worries. Thank you. I was just wondering. Thank you.
Chair, can I finish my question?
No, Glenn, you're out of order.
I had the
Karen,
floor.
do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
Yes, I'm not sure that this is in your domain. If it isn't, I'll ask Mark. But with the 6211 funds that come in from the city that reimburse about 50%, what is that 50% of? Is that 50% of your total cost or 50% of the cost of serving Vancouver City?
It would be serving Vancouver City. We don't.
But it's
Yeah, go ahead.
serving, so it's cost to district court to serve Vancouver.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's 50. So I don't
It's 50
understand yet.
Yeah, so the assumption is 50% of the district court cost increase will be offset by 6211 charges to Vancouver. So in order for district court to process additional items due to law enforcement increases, not felonies, this is mostly misdemeanors, traffic, 50% of that will be charged back to the city.
And so the county will be picking up the remaining 50% of what serves Vancouver.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
I have just a quick
Sue,
question.
go ahead.
On the county's sheriff's department request, we had seen 20, 30, and 40. Does this assume 40
Yes, it does.
additional? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, well, thank you for doing all of that data crunching as best we can forecast. This is information that obviously is now coming out, and it would have been great to talk about up front with the city.
Yes. So
Wait.
if I can, because I know Brian's got to go,
Please.
if we can invite Superior Court up to talk about their impacts. And while there is, unless there's any other questions for District Court, because he will not be able to stay.
Okay, last call for district court questions.
I'd just like to say thank you for participating in the ad hoc group and the commitment going forward to continue that collaboration.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that at the end. You'll be gone, but obviously law and justice has existed. I led it for 5 years. We've always taken on these subjects amongst all the stakeholders, from jail services to reentry service to community court to homeless enforcement. It's a great collaborative process with all the stakeholders. It would have been great to have this discussion in the beginning
Yes.
in that organization. Thank you. Superior Court, come on down.
And
Chair,
while they're-
point of order. Is legal in the room?
Okay, I'm sorry. What was your question, Glenn?
I said point of order. I wanted to know if our legal team is in the room.
We have a lot of lawyers in the room.
All right.
Christine
So-
Cook is here right now.
All right. So during that previous discussion, I had the floor. And the chair has no right to interrupt me when I have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Superior Court is next up.
You're not following Robert's Rules of Order.
push your button. Push your button.
Your question was misplaced. We had district court presenting. We have Superior Court now. Maybe your question would be more relevant for this participant. We have to get through the agenda. We have a lot of presenters that have been waiting all morning, including the PA, our public defense, our sheriff team. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Council. My name is Pamela Hartman-Beyer, and I'm the new Superior Court Administrator. I haven't met some of you yet, so this is my first time presenting to Council. How about now? Perfect. Okay, thank you. So this was a very difficult task. As you've already heard, no one in the state has kind of estimated the need based on the number of officers in the street as to what that calculates in terms of cases. But we tried our very best with the data that we have at this time. And so Superior Court, Juvenile Court, the clerk's office, the prosecuting attorney, and public defense got together to look at these numbers and how they could potentially impact us. And I say potentially because these are all estimates. In the process, we also determined that we will continue to meet on a regular basis to review the impacts that come along, and hopefully we can have better estimates in the future of the impact. So what we did is we took a 6-year estimate of our felony case filings, and we took out COVID years, the 2 COVID years, and we got an estimate of what that number was. We used that estimate to determine the number of officers currently on the street to come up with a number of cases per officer. And then we used the calculations provided by Vancouver Police Department and the Clark County Sheriff's Office to come up with the rollout for how those officers would be deployed and how it would then impact our staffing. So when you look at current to 2023 numbers, what that is our current number of judicial officers in both the criminal adult rotation and the juvenile rotation hearing cases. And when you factor in the number of new officers coming onto the street and the calculations we did by 2032, we anticipate that we will need 3 additional judicial officers to serve to hear cases. I think Councillor Young makes a good point. We don't really know the impact it's going to have on felony cases. I think it's unreasonable to say there will be more murders or more high-profile crimes. I don't think that's the case. I think our sheriff's office and our officers respond to all of those cases, but we don't know the impact that we're going to have on Class C felonies or different felonies that they may be able to respond to in different ways or with more resources. So this is all an estimate. When we look at our needs increase across the board and by 38% by 2033. And so that's the increase you see over time in all of our staffing needs, from judicial assistants, administrative staff, our therapeutic court participation, our jury administration, which is a shared service with district court, our pretrial services, which is shared services as well, and language access. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Like I said, these are estimates. These are just trying to calculate what the potential impacts could be. We are not commenting on either of the measures. We're very neutral. We just have to hear the cases that come before us.
Super. Thank you very much. Len, I'll give you the first question.
Well, it would have been nice to have also asked this of district court. What my question was, that there is scalability on these. There is some degree of diminishing cases as you add officers. And my question for both divisions was, has that been accounted for, or has it been scaled on a 1-to-1 ratio?
Like I said, this has never been done before. So the way we scaled it was officers per case. But when I looked at officers, I didn't calculate just the officers on the street. I calculated the total number of sworn officers. And so I think our calculation is very, very reasonable because it's a lower amount than it would be if we just calculated a number of cases per officer on the street. So it's scaled in some degree, but it like I said, all of these are estimates.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that was what my question was did we account for some form of diminishment? And you answered my question. I appreciate that. I know there's no way that we can predict exactly how this will unfold.
And if I can just also state, we didn't predict the other impacts to our system. We hear adult felony cases and juvenile felony cases, but we also hear civil protection orders and domestic cases and juvenile dependency cases. If there's an increase in law enforcement, I would make the assumption that there will be an increase in other types of cases because those resources are better known throughout the community and there's better touches. We did not calculate that in this formula because there's no way to quantify what that impact could be. That is also why we said we would continue to meet and kind of realize the impacts as we move forward.
Other questions by counselors? Michelle or Karen? So thank you so much for participation. And some of the overtone of these questions is, well, if we flood the market with law enforcement, crime will go away. Oh my gosh, that would be a great theory. But yes, we are investigating all our robberies and we are investigating all our murders. We know that. But traffic enforcement and some of the property thefts, and by the way, the legislature may change and recriminalize aspects of drug use and property crimes. And the capacity then of law enforcement increases, and everyone in this room knows it. And this is a showcase to educate the public. Everyone in this room knows that it impacts the prosecutor's office, district court, superior court, probation services, the clerk's office, jail services, reentry services. So the more we talk about these issues on how all of these are tied together for capacity and resourcing at the earliest moment, that collaboration is crucial. So thank you for your best estimates on the impacts that we're going to see. Who's up next?
The clerk's office.
I'm glad I mentioned the clerk.
Am I on? Okay. Charlene Huffman, Chief Deputy Clerk. Chief Deputy Clerk, here. Am I good?
If you could be a little bit closer.
Okay. All right. Good.
Perfect. Now we
Okay.
can hear you.
Charlene Huffman, Chief Deputy Clerk. Glad to be here, Council, County Manager's Office. We were involved with gathering the data, although for us, we had to depend more on what prosecuting attorney, the court determined the felony arrests, the increased law enforcement would affect them, and then worked from that space to determine what our needs would be. Of course, increased judicial officers requires us to have additional people in court, in addition to covering the workload as well. I would reiterate what both Brian and Pam have stated about the increase, this being an estimate, an assumption. Also, what Peter acknowledged in the increase in population. We have only increased our numbers on the chart here per criminal matters. We are not addressing other matters. We are addressing juvenile court and felony court. But again, as was stated by Pam, additional law enforcement contacts are going to increase our civil protection orders. They are going to increase our domestic cases. All of the new cases will then increase our needs for appeals and exhibits. So this will hit us in every area if it increases as expected. In addition to the fact that our population is also increasing, which we have not addressed any of that in this estimate. So I would also reiterate, as Brian did, that additional staffing would bring additional management requirements, which we are sorely lacking, as we've discussed before, in the clerk's office. We will have a group of in-court clerks that will number almost 20 that we will need a manager for. We will have increased finances. We will have increased bail. We will have increased payments, which will affect our accounting division. So again, we're estimating these. We aren't even addressing population group growth in general, even probate guardianships. We have a huge demographic of baby boomers that are moving into guardianships in many areas. We're not addressing that. So I just want to emphasize that what we have estimated here is just in the criminal department of the clerk's office.
Thank you for these numbers and questions of council. Any online? Thank you. You let the courts function.
Prosecuting attorney.
And thank you, Tony, for waiting all morning.
Been an enjoyable morning. Can you hear me okay? All right, thanks. Good morning. First, just general comment. This is a difficult area that we're looking at, but I do want to acknowledge the general concept that we should prioritize public safety, law enforcement, the courts. And I commend the city of Vancouver for, in a difficult budget cycle, deciding to really focus on trying to increase public safety, and commend this council for also focusing on public safety. Obviously, our community is focused on the need for public safety. So this, I want to kind of focus on that positive work that we're doing, that we're all trying to work together to figure out the answers to increase public safety. I would also comment that, in my tenure as the prosecutor, I've seen great collaboration between the city and the county with respect to public safety, between the sheriff's office, VPD, the prosecutor's office, VPD, and the city attorney's office, in collaborative efforts that we have engaged in over the years to deliver public safety. So, I see this as a difficult budget issue, but also opportunity for increased collaboration moving forward. And I certainly hope that we continue in that spirit. With respect to the work on this issue, I'd echo our Superior Court administrator's comments just now about kind of the difficulty of projecting forward, but I also want to really thank our new Superior Court administrator for the work that she did on this. Pamela Hartman-Beyer kind of really did a lot of the lion's share work in trying to crunch the numbers on a short time frame. I think she did a great job. And she already explained to you the group that got together to sort of try to predict, what happens to the rest of the law and justice system if you put a bunch more officers on the street. And of course, we all know we cannot just say, this many officers equals this many more cases. We all know we can't do that. But I agree it's a good exercise for us to engage in together. And that group, our office, Superior Court Clerk's Office, Superior Court Administrator's Office, Indigent Defense, we got together and, we all kind of internally as departments crunch our numbers all the time to look at workloads. To do it more holistically, we need to have the Sheriff's Office and District Court. I think in the next meetings, we've agreed to do quarterly meetings so that we actually can track the impact as we move forward. So I think there's going to be positive there. So we did our best to kind of come up with estimates for what happens if we add all these law enforcement officers from different agencies. Of course, it depends on how they deploy, if they're, where their focus is, if it's, neighborhood response type detective units are going to drive a lot of felonies. If it's like if VPD, it's just a lot of traffic, well, that would send a lot of cases to the city attorney's office, not as many to our office. So how they deploy would have a great effect on what happens, how many officers they get as laterals versus how long it takes to just get new hires through the academy. Obviously has a big effect on timing of the impact, and of course, what other things happen out there. What does the legislature do? The legislature could do something like the Supreme Court did with the Blake case that decriminalized drug possession, vastly decreased the number of cases going into Superior Court. So we can't predict that sort of thing. Hope we don't get another thing like that. But one thing that is very much looming on the horizon that I mentioned at Law and Justice that I feel compelled to mention here is the Supreme Court is currently looking at deciding on caseload standards and a massive review of caseload standards for indigent defense. I know that our indigent defense coordinator is of the opinion that they are going to adopt those new caseload standards. We don't know. They just indicated that they're going to take more comment in the middle of November. If they do implement those caseload standards on the time frame as was recommended by the Bar Association, it would require triple the number of public defenders over a 3-year period, which would be an incredible and I'm not sure survivable shock to the criminal justice system. I think if they expand that time period very significantly, maybe over a decade, that may be something that could be absorbed by the justice system more. But that sort of other external thing obviously can and would have a huge impact on what happens with the justice system. So that's the big other looming thing out there that we don't have the answer to, but it is very much out there. So I agree with Pamela. We did the best we could to sort of give a general idea of what we think would happen with these additional officers to the rest of the system, and we'll track as we can. So available for any questions?
So let's go to counselors. Do we have questions of our prosecuting attorney?
Chair, I have a question. Just
Okay.
really quick. Two
Kathleen?
things. 120, I just wanted to, you had a note on the spreadsheet that none of the numbers include anything for district court. Is that correct? So there
Yeah.
might be some
Right,
impact there
yeah.
that's not accounted for.
Correct. Yeah. So, if we're looking particularly at Vancouver increasing their cases, their misdemeanor cases are going to be handled by the city attorney's office, not our office. So we'll handle all the felony cases that are driven by BPD. Obviously, increase on the sheriff's side. We'll handle all of those misdemeanor cases. So we expect there will be an increase also in district court. But if we're just looking at the general, I tried to look at this at kind of really general broad strokes workload of the prosecutor's office, because we can't really drill down and say exact numbers anyway. So with just general broad strokes idea, that's how we came up with the increase that we did. Thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo, I know Tony talked about the caseload standards, and I think there's an opportunity to have further discussion, and the Director of Public Defense is here that will be sharing his data here momentarily, but the focus for the director is on the law and justice impacts right now, but we certainly will have additional discussions because there will be a significant impact if and when the case standards are approved and implemented.
So not hearing any additional questions, I'm just going to comment. Number one, thank you for your positive questions and pointing out that, between VPD and the sheriff, great working relationship. You and the city attorney, great working relationship. Things are working. But the more we showcase the inner workings for the public is really crucial. And
Agreed.
as just from me to you, obviously you're central to this whole process working. So we're hoping that you continue on the path of enlarging and engaging in all of our therapeutic courts as much as possible with the ever increasing cases that can be pushed into those courts, pretrial diversion, getting people out of the system, getting people out of jails. I mean, that's the holy grail is for public safety is preventing recidivism, having a positive response on the criminal justice system. You're doing a great job. I just wanted to put it out there. And thank you very much for highlighting what I will say will, quite frankly, be a disaster for our state if the Supreme Court just wholly adopts these case standards. We cannot triple our defense bar overnight. It can't be done. And then what will end up happening is you will either stop filing cases or you'll start dismissing cases, or the court will on your behalf when we don't have a defense attorney to step into a representation role. This is a looming disaster. Thank you for reminding the public of it. And we have prepared a response on behalf of the council, as most of the counties councils have, commissioners. This is a looming disaster if the court wholly adopts this as proposed. So any further on comments on that? But the public needs to know this is percolating.
Well, yeah, we don't know until the Supreme Court, issues their ruling on what they're going to do. And I don't know what they're going to do. They've taken lots of comments. They've got the Bar Association's recommendations. Those lawyers just don't exist, there's the financial aspect, but also for, our county to just hire triple the number of criminal defense attorneys. Again, if it's over a very long period of time, perhaps it can be done. If it's over a short period of time, it just can't be done. And we're in a better position in Clark County with respect to number of defense attorneys by far than many other counties across the state. Other counties across the state, already Superior Court judges are routinely dismissing felony cases because there's not a defense attorney. In other places in the state, not in Clark County, although our district court just issued a letter last week indicating they're going to start dismissing cases in district court for lack of defense attorneys here in Clark County, which is an issue that I hope this council deals with quickly. So hate to be the bearer of not great news. I started with a positive message. I'd like to remind you of that.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you publicly for your participation in the ad hoc committee, for your positive statement. And, we're doing the best we can in terms of estimates. Could be a high, low, but we need to do this planning. And so the ongoing role of that ad hoc group will be very important in evaluating this and whatever else comes our way going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Last comments or questions from
Quick
anyone?
question.
Yes, please go ahead, Karen.
Both you and Kathleen have mentioned indigent defense and the decision that may be forthcoming. Specifically, how would those numbers, if the standards change, impact your numbers that we're looking at here before us?
So my plan, if that occurs, would generally still to be file cases. So cases are referred to the prosecutor's office by law enforcement, and then we file cases. I would continue to file cases. If the court could not appoint defense counsel, the court would have to dismiss cases. I hope we do not get into that situation. We should not be in that situation, absent this new potential act by the Supreme Court. If that comes to pass, we will be in a very difficult position. If that comes to pass, and on that short time period that the Bar Association recommended, I think our courts will have no choice but to dismiss cases, unfortunately. I hope that doesn't happen.
Glad to hear you're going to keep up the numbers, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
I think that concludes your presentation
Public defense.
Thank you, counsel.
and our public defender stepping forward.
And I know our director did include some numbers in here that were directly related to the case standards if they were, but I'm going to ask him to just focus on the law and justice aspect today, knowing that we'll come back for further discussion on the potential impacts.
Do you have any questions on our numbers? I based them on the current caseload standards. So anticipating growth based on what the Superior Court suggested with our current caseload standards.
So thanks for being here with the county and doing the work you're doing as we transition to a public defender model in the county. And thanks for this additional work on the data. Do we have questions by council on the data?
And I don't think the council's seen the data yet.
Oh,
so this is,
okay.
so I don't know if there's additional
Are
methodology.
you able to see it online, first of all? I mean, we have it up on our screen here. Okay, so if you have questions, we'll go to Councilor Marshall first. She has a question to begin with.
Well, I was just looking at the sheet I had and then looking at this, but in looking at this sheet that was attached, it looks like there's a zero. If you could just explain it, it looks like 0 attorneys in 26, 27, and then it jumps up to 23. So I guess I don't understand those numbers.
I think there may have been a mistake in what I sent to.
No, I think part of it is based on the implementation that was communicated from the city and the sheriff's office. There was 0 anticipated impacts for the first couple of years.
Got it. Okay, thank you. But then in 28, it jumps up to 23
Yes.
new attorneys. Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
And the numbers don't anticipate juvenile courts or district court, as I don't cover those yet.
And we're still going to try to figure out the right balance for conflicts attorneys and what that contract will look like
Yes.
and how many attorneys are needed.
Chair, if I can just add and have our chief public defender talk a little bit more about district court and the impacts that we have Vancouver Defenders who covers our main contract for district court. But I think starting with Administrator Farrell's presentation this morning, the impacts to district court will be significant. And you're not seeing that as they talked, the work group worked on felony criminal cases, and that's what we're seeing reflected here. Does not include the case standards. Those numbers are way different if those are shown. But can you talk a little bit more about that, what that impact will be to Ms. Itmerk's office?
We've had an initial conversation when I was last before you about the numbers in district court. It appears that the numbers are consistent with pre-COVID numbers. The difference being that there are many more people who qualify for court-appointed counsel now. I think it's been a close to a 25% increase in the number of people who qualify for court-appointed counsel. So even if the numbers stay relatively static, we're going to have an increased need for court-appointed attorneys in district court. I believe coming before your desk is going to be an ask for monies now to cover the rest of the year for Vancouver Defender, our major district court contractor. We are beginning to think about what district court looks like in the future through contractors and then perhaps one day through our office. But I can't say much more about it now, except to say I would expect more officers create, bad word. I didn't mean to use it pejoratively. With new officers, there will be new misdemeanor arrests. So there may be a more immediate need for more district court defenders.
So let me ask this question, because focusing away from misdemeanors, and educate me on this, because one of the big initiatives that we will see are these traffic cameras, these traffic running red lights, speeding, whatever they pick up on. If they're in Washington State, if there's no jail as a penalty, they're not entitled to a lawyer at public defense. Is that correct? Or is it different here in Washington?
If these are only traffic offenses, right, the result could be a fine, then no, I would not anticipate that they
Okay.
would.
So and if someone even wants to contest one of those tickets and they demand whatever process there is, I'm imagining it's a court alone citation process, there is no public defense burden
Right.
on your office or, okay. I just wanted to make sure that was true here and not different from other states.
I just want to add one thing to what Tony said about the district court letter, just to make sure, since we have public and media in the room. We are looking at increasing a budget for public defense to go through Christie's office. So I just want to make sure that that will be appointing attorneys at a reasonable rate for cost if we don't have a public defender available through her office. So I just want to make sure that that would be the first step before dismissal takes place.
Other questions of council? Thank you so much. And we look forward to the Supreme Court decision. And
We're not talking about that now.
no.
Thank you.
All right. So jail services stepping forward.
Good morning, Council. David Shook, Director of Jail Services. This is Deputy Director Joe Barnett. Anyways, I wanted to give you just a quick little background on our current status. So I think everybody knows this is a 40-year-old facility, originally built for about 300 beds. We today are 491 beds. Our population today was 490. So as you can see, we have one bed available if all of our inmates were there. We have some inmates up at Western State Hospital and some over at Skamania County that we've been renting for at least the last couple of years. As we add HPOD, which should be coming online anytime, and next year JPOD, which is in the final design discussions in early 2026, will be up to 611 beds. Almost every week we hear from our law enforcement partners hey, how can we bring more inmates to the jail? We're currently on a red status and have been since August. We were on track to get about 8,000 inmates July. And since we've been on this red status, it's slowed them down. As we continue to work, our population in the jail is about 90% felony, as Kathleen had mentioned, and 87% of them are on pretrial status. So we don't have a lot of sentenced inmates, but we have those that are there waiting trial. Maybe some of the numbers in the attorneys and the process and the courts are holding those up, but they're definitely moving them through. They're staying a little bit longer. And so as we continue to look at these numbers, and we took the booking numbers that we've had over the last couple of years, again, 2022, we had a 30% increase coming out of COVID. Last year, 30% increase. We're on task for that again this year. So as we continue to manage those, we looked at the numbers that were provided, whether it was from the sheriff's office with about averaging 23 arrests a year, or the city's total average of arrests that they anticipated with their new officers hitting the street. And we looked at those. Some of the different things that we evaluated is most of those inmates were there for 27 days. It's our average length of stay. If you take out those first 72 hours, it goes up to about 90 days. And so when we look at the kind of inmates that are staying at a longer time, it increases our numbers quite a bit. And so the focus we know and the choke points that we have in our jail, as chair and other counselors and law enforcement are aware, is our booking. Our intake and booking takes sometimes a significant amount of time. When it's just a single officer with an arrest, it averages about 30 minutes, but very quickly it gets up to 60 minutes and maybe just a little bit beyond that if we have multiple arrests all happening at the same time. So our focus with these increased numbers are in several spaces. One is in booking, intake, classifications, transports, and our record staff. As you'll see in our numbers that we're requesting over these next 8 years, we have to, just like law enforcement, it takes about 10 months to upload or prepare a corrections officer to be independent in their efforts and actions. And so again, as we prepare, and the reason why 2026 for us is when we start wanting to add correction staff is because as the numbers for the city and potentially the sheriff's office start in that 2028, you start seeing the increase in bookings. We need to be prepared for that. So as we continue to look at those numbers, the second thing that increases for us are contracts with services. So our food costs go up, our medical contracts go up. Above 500 inmates, we have to go back to contract with our medical providers to make sure that we have enough medical and mental health services for them. The other thing that you've heard me talk about is the complexity of our inmates. We're working on MOUD and MAP programs and different aspects for those inmates that are coming in much sicker than they have historically ever been. A lot of those cases are actually ADA directing, right? Which means that they're not suggested services, they're becoming required services as we work on reentry. And so we're looking at opioid abatements and mental health sales tax and other revenues to be able to bring those resources to us. And so as we look at our different numbers that focus on the booking, that's our first effort for law enforcement. As you can see in that second or third year, as they increase, we need to increase as well. The one thing that oftentimes is kind of unknown is our record staff. Every time an inmate is brought in, our record staff, they touch that record. The first time they go to court, they touch it again. Oftentimes what happens is an inmate will be brought in on a misdemeanor charge, and the cities and other law enforcement agencies are really good at looking at our live roster. And as soon as they do, they'll bring in and lay a bunch of other charges on them. So these inmates are multiple times having to be booked and processed. Here's an example over the July 4th weekend, 80 arrests, 226 plus cases were added to that. So again, for us, a little bit of movements, but for our law and justice partners and the courts and the prosecutors and so forth, that's going to be more impact. So as we continue to look at our numbers and our process, we're really focused on those booking, reentry, and some of those other efforts. And that's where you're going to see our costs and our increased numbers.
Can I add something real quick, Chair, to this before we go to questions? The other thing that we looked at, especially with the jail, is, and Councilor Marshall and Councilor Belcott sit on the committee for the jail remodel and expansion, is we don't currently have housing for over that amount. And if we add officers in the next 3 years, even if we were in a renovation, that was approved by a vote, and we were well on our way to expanding our jail, that's going to be a choke point. So I just want to make clear that the capital piece is separate from this booking area and staffing that Director Shook is talking about.
Can I just add 2 more points real quick? Incarceration costs for us are those costs that we're already bearing for the county as that goes. And so if we take that one average deputy who arrests 23 arrests that year, if you average that in that 27-day average length of stay, and by the $190 a day that we charge for those bed rates, it's about $117,000. And so again, you can sequentially or grow that out by all the extra bookings and arrests that the county is going to experience and how that goes. The second thing that I've heard is law enforcement, our partners, and talking about the overtime that's being spent, and a lot of these positions will take that. Just some recent information that I gathered the last couple of days is we have about 102 officers who do the lion's share of our security work. We just passed 10,000 mandatory hours of overtime. So those are posts and positions that are required in a jail, and we are unable to not man or put a security officer in. And so they have really taken the brunt of a lot of that. We're hiring every 2 weeks. We get 12 to 15 people testing with us or signed up to testing. And so we're definitely hiring lots of folks, unlike many other jails around us regionally and in the state. And so we're working on it, but we're definitely impacted where with our staff. So anyways, wanted to add those in there.
Now we'll go to questions of council. Councilor Marshall, did you have a question?
Well, it's just with all of these presentations reinforcing how strained the system is right now, even without any of the other things going forward. And just looking at the years going forward and where that new jail or the remodel, that's I don't see how that easily fits into all of this, but we'll work on that. Thank you.
Questions by council? Michelle, Karen, Glenn? Okay, well, thank you for the additional data.
Thank you.
Hopefully this gets translated to the public so they'll be able to understand all the impacts and the continuing challenges, as Councilor Marshall mentioned.
So for next steps, I know that there's a lot of financial information that's out there. I know originally you had heard from the sheriff's office regarding their request as well. I didn't know if council, because there's a lot of information to absorb, if you wanted to continue discussion at council time next week. We do have, or if the sheriff, we can certainly ask if the sheriff has anything, if they have impacts on this. I have not seen any data on that, and they could, I don't know if there's any additional information that the sheriff has for today for their request, but this was on the impacts for Proposition 4 as well as the sheriff's office. So I want to get some initial direction thoughts from council on what we can do. What do you need to continue this discussion? I also just wanted to mention again the importance of the Law and Justice Council, and that after the city decided to approve this and put it on the ballot, council came together and was having discussions of should we also include something on November ballot because of the concern. And it was opted at that time, let's work with our Law and Justice partners, bring it back for discussion for potential February ballot. I also want to know, I did reach out to the city during those discussions, asking if they were willing also to take a pause and bring it back to Law and Justice Council. They agreed it's a great resource, but was not inclined to move forward at that point because council had already made a decision. So what is council's desire for today for next steps? You want to do additional discussion next week? You want to talk about any of the numbers in more detail? You want to hear from the sheriff's office?
So,
Feedback.
okay. Lot to unpack there. First thing is, from my point of view, I think John Horsch himself is not available today. And I know that their work, or at least I've been told, the sheriff's, working on their budget presentation, still working on their needs. And we have in the past talked about the reaction to what will be additional work for the sheriff if Prop 4 does pass. But let me just look at those in uniform and badges right now. Did you wish to make a presentation? Are you preparing to make a presentation in the next week or so? What would be your druthers today? So can we go to that first? So please step forward. We still have some time before lunch.
Good morning. Hopefully this microphone is working okay this time. My name is Michael McCabe. I'm the Chief Administrative Deputy, and as you heard, Sheriff Horsch could not be with us today. However, he did send me this morning to at least provide some additional information about his request, which, as you know, he has stated publicly many times, his number one priority internally is increased staffing. Externally, it's obviously community safety. The two do go hand in hand in our estimation. And so today, I will share with you that the sheriff's request has largely remained unchanged from the presentation that we provided back in July. Our community needs 40 new deputies and 16 non-sworn civilian employees added to the levy lift lid. 40 new deputies brings us back to at least the state average for an agency of our size serving the population that we have in Clark County. And we heard this morning a lot of talk about prudence and doing more with less. And I will deviate from his remarks slightly to share this with you. This is my 30th year with the sheriff's office. I've worked for 3 different sheriffs now. I think the sheriff's office has been a model for doing more with less, a state model. Sadly, in some ways, it's well known that we are one of the lowest staffed agencies in Washington state. Every day, the men and women that serve this community do more with less, and they are committed. So I would categorize not only the rest of the county, but us as well as being very prudent with the staff that we have. What 40 new deputies will do for us is it will help us manage what has been genuinely the downstream effects of many things. We had significant position cuts back in 2008. We talked about that in July when the housing market crashed. We talked about the fact that it wasn't anybody's fault necessarily, but the reality is we lost positions. We have had, as you've heard from others this morning, a decade's worth of population growth. What wasn't discussed this morning, but is vitally important to this conversation, is the new statewide police reform laws, because they change the way we do business. We have additional requirements for state training. There are new mandates on us every year. We have an increased demand for traffic enforcement and other specialized services. The community is requesting these services. The general complexity of the job. Over the 30 years, I've noticed laws become more complicated. Expectations of the community are much higher. They expect more out of this younger generation than was expected of, say, my father when he served. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing that they're better trained and that we expect more. But with that comes a price, and that is a downstream effect. And we'll discuss that a little bit. I would not categorize our request as an expansion. What I would submit to you today is that I am suggesting that we need to stabilize the sheriff's office so that we can better protect the community. Stabilize it from the cuts that occurred in 2008, stabilize us, help us absorb the population growth, stabilize us, help us address these statewide police reform laws better, and stabilize our training. Everywhere the sheriff goes, he hears the same thing from the community, as I'm sure many of you do, and that is that they want to see more deputies in their community. We had a recent town hall last week, and the number one topic, as you would probably not be surprised to hear, was traffic safety. The second person that spoke to the sheriff that night shared with the room that he himself had lost his wife in a fatal traffic collision. That moved the sheriff, that moves all of us. We know that we can do more with traffic, but we need the additional deputies to do that. The second most talked about topic, as I'm sure you're aware, is just general community safety. And it's not necessarily the felonies. You're right. We will, obviously, we're going to investigate the felonies. It's the other stuff. It's the things that people want because they want to feel safe where they live, where they work, where they visit. They express concerns about their kids. They want their kids to be safe at school. They want their kids to be safe playing out front or at a park. Business owners talk to the sheriff quite often about their safety at their establishments. They want to feel safe at work or where their business is. They want to open their business in the morning and feel safe. The general public often brings up the topic to the sheriff about the fentanyl epidemic. People want to know that our deputies are doing something about that. And that does take resources. I'd like to share with you just for a moment today's staffing realities for your sheriff's office. On an average day, we have 7 deputies assigned to patrol. Our unincorporated area is over 500 square miles. At night, that drops to 6. That's 3 on the west side and 3 on the east side. As I said earlier, we have the lowest staffed sheriff's office in Washington state per capita. We do more with less every single day. However, if you live in a rural area of the county, you likely do not have a deputy assigned to your area regularly. At night, and this is not to be hyperbolic, but at night, your closest deputy may be coming to you from Hazeldale or Orchards. That is just the reality of where we staff our people. There is a downstream effect to Washington state police reform laws, and we've not discussed that in detail, and this is probably not the time or place, but let me leave you with a few thoughts. We must dedicate more time and resources to a single call than has ever been done before. And I'm talking to you with 30 years experience and the former SWAT commander. Our SWAT team is called out far more now than it ever was in the past for safety reasons. Calls that used to take 1 or 2 deputies are taking 5, maybe more, oftentimes require a sergeant to be there. We're having to set up an incident command more often than we used to, all because we are required to provide time, distance, shielding, and as many resources as we can bring, to include mental health and any other resources, to try to peacefully resolve the situation. And I started by saying that is better. Yes, it is. That is a better outcome. That is a safer outcome, but it is a more labor intensive outcome. Longer the days of just a deputy showing up and grabbing somebody and throwing them in the back of a car. It just doesn't work that way anymore. It's not safe, and the state doesn't allow it. There are downstream effects of the Washington state training requirements. You know, the state requires every single deputy to attend 24 hours of mandatory training per year. So it's per year per deputy. It's not uncommon for us to have to hold makeup training days to accommodate staff who are either held on shift or unable to attend. And many of our deputies, I will tell you, end up having to train on their days off, which brings up another downstream effect that we're dealing with. And the county manager mentioned it earlier, and so did the jail support division. The costs of overtime continue to skyrocket for the county. But more importantly, we're burning our staff out. It's not uncommon for our staff to have to work multiple shifts of overtime per week. As you heard from some of the other divisions, our average deputy works about 218 hours of overtime a year. Now, that's the average. There are many that work much more. Our SWAT operators are at about almost just short of 400 hours of overtime per year. The downstream effect of that leads to my next discussion very briefly, and that is our long-term deputies' health and wellness. Now, there are numerous health studies related to the effects of stress and trauma on one's health. And I'm certainly not a medical doctor, but I think you know that the more you work a person and the less rest they get, the harder it is going to be on them physically. Most every deputy that we have working for us has at least 2 or more collateral duties. And as I said previously, 218 hours of overtime on average. That's not a ton of rest when they're already working 12-hour shifts. We are, the current state of the sheriff's office, we are not prepared for more than one emergency at a time. Now, what do I mean by an emergency? Well, an emergency is different for different people, and it can be anything that you see on the news. Now, if the big one happens, yes, you're going to get everybody. You're going to get Vancouver. You're going to get Battleground. You're going to get all of us, because we are, as Tony said, we are one team, and we do support each other. And the Vancouver Police Department will help us, and we will help them, and so will all the small cities. But there are some emergencies that are not that big. They just require the agency of jurisdiction, and we're not even equipped for that. One family fight, if you only have 6 deputies working, you've just eliminated 3 of them and probably the sergeant. So you're down to 3. I'm not here to speak about the Vancouver Police Department's request. Neither is the sheriff offering comments about that through me. But I would like to share a quick comparison. So the sheriff's office and the Vancouver Police Department serve essentially the same size population. But I'd like you to consider that the Vancouver Police Department, as it sits right now, has 3 times the number of officers that we have per 1,000 residents. Their proposal to add 80 new officers is in and of itself more than our entire patrol division. 40 new deputies will allow us to bring back specialty units like traffic enforcement. It will allow us to reduce overtime. It will allow us to train better. It will allow us to address emergencies better. And most importantly, in my mind, it will help us to increase the health and wellness of our deputies, which increases the longevity of their career, which lowers the liability for the county, and everybody wins. These are professionals. We pay them well, we train them well, and I want to take care of them, and I know you do too. Our sheriff supports this request. We believe the community supports this request. And we know the council has a lot to weigh, and the costs are going to be enormous. And every department that before you has brought their projections of what this might do. I would simply share with you that this is needed for the sheriff's office, and we would like to be a part of the levy lid lift if you choose to send that to the voters. Thank you.
Thank you for that heartfelt presentation. I would ask if there are questions of council.
Yes, Chair, I have a couple.
Please go ahead, Karen.
Let me begin by saying, Chief, you know from regular discussions that we have, that I thank you for that opportunity, that I am completely supportive of law enforcement and specifically of the sheriff's office.
Yes, ma'am.
So if my questions sound a little bit off from that, they're not. They are totally in that context. First, I'd like to confirm you are requesting 40 additional deputy or sworn officers, regardless of the outcome of Prop 4. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Okay. Now, the bulk of my questions, though, really revolve around the financing. As I read the budget request that came forward from the sheriff's office, it was not for 40 sworn officers. It was for 13, I believe, 12 deputies and 1 sergeant. And I don't understand why that disconnect. Why are you not requesting the budget for 40 if you're asking for 40?
That's a great question. And as I understand it, it's because the sheriff recognized that there would be no funding source for 40. We know that 40, if the taxpayers approved it, it would take several years to roll that out. We can't hire 40 at once. We can hire about 10 to 12 a year on top of what we're trying to hire to cover those that retire or those that leave the sheriff's office. I think this was his initial request that was proposed, one that he thought was more realistic for current funding sources, but 40 without help from the taxpayers probably wouldn't have been realistic. That's my understanding. I hope that answers your question.
So what we would have seen then in future years would be similar requests every year as it goes forward from the sheriff's office until you got up to the number 40 by the year 2037. Is that the notion?
Well, I don't know that it'd be 2037, but yes, ma'am, the understanding would be if without a significant revenue source, you have to make small incremental changes to improve the environment that we currently find ourselves in, which this council has helped us do. You know, last year we asked for help at the county campus and the council answered the call and helped us. Now that wasn't a request for 40, that was a request for 6, or 7, I think total you gave us, some for extradition, some for the campus. So each sheriff that I've served has tried to make incremental improvements towards the goal. If you remember when we talked in July, back in 08, prior to the housing crash, the council had agreed that they would hire 8 a year in perpetuity until we caught up. And that was a great plan. And that was one that probably could have been sustained had it not been for a worldwide market crash. And of course, there was a hiring freeze and that stopped. And here we are today. Now, had that not ever occurred, we wouldn't be before you today asking for 40 because we would have kept pace with the population, but we haven't.
So let's just say hypothetically, and maybe that would be the case, that there would be the 12 deputies and the 1 sergeant that was approved for in the budget, the upcoming budget. Would that lower the number from 40 that you're requesting for the levy lid lift, or whatever mechanism would be found for going to the public?
Yes, ma'am. And that's another really great question. And yes, the answer is we would subtract the 12 or the 13, however many you approve, from the 40. So the first, I think you heard one of the other speakers present that we estimate the first 14 deputies you give us has 0 impact on the courts or Tony's office or any of our law and justice partners, because quite honestly, the plan is 1 per squad to help reduce overtime. So the greatest impact would probably be to the county overtime budget, and just helping with wellness, and maybe, helping in some ways with a balance of cases. But generally speaking, we're so far behind that you wouldn't start seeing impacts until you were in the 30 and 40 deputies. The first 20 are almost a wash in terms of impact.
Well, we understand the need to impact overtime for personal reasons, not aside from budgetary. So that's important.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I've got all kinds of questions about the budget matters, but that's enough for today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I'm just going to chime in now because I'm really frustrated because we had this conversation before and I couldn't get 3 votes to support a levy lid lift for your 13 deputies. I think it's an embarrassment. And yeah, you should have been able to cash that check on the plan 2008 whenever it was solidified with prior sheriffs, and we wouldn't be so far behind. Anyway, we're getting the noon hour. Are there additional questions for today's meeting?
I'd just like to thank you very much for that presentation. I think the public really doesn't understand all of the demands that are placed on you. It's the highest stress. Your lives are on the line. And so whatever we can do to keep the officers safe, I think, is the highest priority. So I'm glad that you are here today. And I know there was concern, I think, about whether or not bringing all of this information to light was an indication that we were on one side or the other of Vancouver's measure. And, and I had mixed feelings about that myself, but I think it's critically important to bring all of this information to light because these are decisions that we're going to bring forward to the public, however strategically we can do that, because that's a puzzle we'll need to figure out. But I just wanted to personally thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So as we approach the noon hour, I would just like to answer the manners. We're going to need on this levy lid lift for public safety, we're going to need some time. We're going to somehow need to spend more time because I'm hearing some of the same discussion we heard months ago. So anyway, we're going to have to work it in, whether it's just additional planning time on the budget, supplemental budget, whatever you have planned for discussing a levy lid lift. We're going to need some time to really get back into. We've had full presentations before by the sheriff.
Yeah, I think it's going to be both. If the council wants to put something on the February ballot for like a levy lid lift or public safety sales tax, we have to have everything to the auditor's by December 13th. So for me, and we already have draft resolutions from our prior discussions. And it'll also give us time to pivot depending on if the Proposition 4 passes.
So are there 3 votes to making that so? I mean, we need to, I had made the motion to give you those deputies and I couldn't get 3 votes. Whatever I can do, I would like to see if I've got 3 counselors before the end of the year to get this put together.
I think personally, I would recommend that we bring this back next week to council time because you really need to see the financial impact of all of law and justice, because I can tell you everything that's needed, a levy lift is not going to pay for that. So we're going to have to talk about priorities and council, and our current budget doesn't sustain ongoing.
We have 3 thumbs up to put it on for next week, council time.
Yes, and I will summarize cost per law and justice group, cost for the sheriff's office request, and then how much the levy lift could support. And then
Other support for that.
Just a comment. I'd like to have more information about public safety sales tax along with that. Which
Yes,
I presume you're going to do anyway.
Yes, and we have that. You guys have seen that option before. One commitment that I think I made is I will be reaching out to the cities to see if they're putting anything out there, because that will impact the amount of money that we could also ask for.
Okay, so you have my thumbs up. Sue just raised her thumb.
Yeah, I would like to look at all potential funding options, and as long as I think we don't need a 60% majority, that would be good. And look to February for whatever components of the whole package we can realistically fund.
Any objection by any counselor? Okay, so it's on the noon hour. I do need to end on this because I had been talking to Kathleen and getting this put together. Thank you so much for all this work in getting this together. You know, I watched the city council work on Monday. I'm not going to address particular comments attributed to particular people. But number one, putting all of this, all these partners, all these stakeholders in the discussion as Prop 4 was beginning to percolate within the city should have been before our stakeholders at Law and Justice. That was a comment I heard. It was a missed opportunity for collaboration. So moving forward, we need to more actively collaborate. And we see this time and time again where we're just reacting. This is not propaganda. We had another counselor say, geez, I wonder what information the Clark County Council is getting in formulating that resolution. Well, here it is. Please watch it. Please look at this data. All of these stakeholders, all of these instrumentalities of law and justice are impacted, and that we should have been discussing this for the past year. I fear that part of this enormous problem we have for our county budget and resourcing all these stakeholders has prevented us from taking care of our own sheriff's department. You know, we got cold feet. We didn't want to compete with Prop 4 on this ballot. I mean, there was a lot of gamesmanship on what will pass, what won't pass, what will the voter endorse. We need to get beyond that. All our intent was to highlight all of the potential costs. I had never heard one counselor say we're against Prop 4. And we heard that on Monday. I don't know where that came from. I know there was an initial Columbia story online that kind of took that tone, but then they quickly changed it once they watched the whole presentation of what the council was deciding. As far as I know, every counselor here supports Prop 4 in one manner or another. I wish it wasn't such a big trunk, as you've highlighted today, in comparison to the sheriff. But we all support public safety. That's our number one duty. We are not against Prop 4. We never said that. It was nowhere intimated in our resolution. What we were trying to highlight is what we heard today are the potential, as best we can estimate by all the stakeholders, here are the impacts. And that's in addition to the ongoing challenges, even if Prop 4 doesn't pass. We still have the challenges in the jail. We still have resourcing for the prosecutor, for our defense, depending on what the Supreme Court does, all beyond our control. We have a lot of impacts that the public needs to know about if we are going to ask for a levy lift or a public safety sales tax increase to get you the additional deputies you need to keep up, to be healthy, to be stable,
Thank you.
whatever words you want to use. In any case, we'll be in recess until council time at 1. Did you need anything else, Kathleen, from us? No. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, council. I appreciate your time.
I'm not sure I'm going to come back. I may be online. I think my laptop is now fixed, that my microphone will stay on. What's that? Oh, you know what?